Greetings and welcome to this Policy Dialogue, Surface Trust Policy Dialogue Forum. My task this evening is simply to introduce the moderator, who will in turn introduce the speakers. Simba Makoni, our moderator, is well known, an intellectual, politician, a businessman, and above all, in the context of this discussion, a former Minister of Finance. And we have another former Minister of Finance in the form of Tendai Biti. We thought Simba would be the best to moderate this session on a very controversial subject, the sovereign fund, which for some reason has been renamed the Mutapa Fund. We'd hope that the panel will unpack that for us, the reasons behind renaming, and also explain the content of this so-called Mutapa Fund. So I don't want to say much, except to say, Simba, welcome, and thank you very much for agreeing to be our moderator this evening. Up to you now, Simba.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ibo. Good evening, colleagues. I am honored and delighted to be participating in this important discussion. The format is, as we know, there are going to be two main presenters, Prof. Gift Muganu and Tendai Biti, and we will have a discussant in Janet Joe. The concept note has already briefly introduced our discussants and the presenters, so I won't take time. I would just like to urge all of us, particularly Gift and Tendai, that we do keep to the allocated time. It's 30 minutes each. I consider that very generous, and 15 minutes for Janet to do the discussion critique, so that we have enough time for the discussion among ourselves. So without further ado, it is my privilege to invite Professor Gift Muganu, who needs no introduction. Gift, over to you.
Thank you very much, Doc. It's an honor to present in a session which you are chairing. I also want to respect colleagues here, Professor Ibo Mandaza, Professor Tony, and the distinguished presenters, and also colleagues who are going to be observing and participating in this discussion. So I'll stick to the time, Doc. Might be below 30 minutes, but I just want to hit the key points home for people to come in or to stimulate our discussion. My presentation will be in three formats. I will look at the background around sovereign wealth fund for us to appreciate what is this animal. Then, of course, I'll talk about our current Mutapa Investment Fund. Then we'll build a discourse to compare the two, our current Mutapa Investment Fund, and also comparing the other countries, how they've handled their sovereign wealth fund. Then the third part of my presentation is then to look at the implication of the Mutapa Investment Fund on the economy in particular. So in this way, I will start talking about the background. It's just to conceptualize what is a sovereign wealth fund. A sovereign wealth fund is a state-owned investment fund, which is normally funded by surpluses from a number of sources. One, trade surpluses from commodities, minerals in particular. If your country is making a budget surplus, again, those surpluses can be invested into a sovereign wealth fund. Again, proceeds from a privatization of state-owned enterprises can also be part of capital which can make up a sovereign wealth fund. And finally, the surpluses again within the state-owned enterprises, instead of them being or even through dividends being into government, can be invested into sovereign wealth fund. The intention, very simple, is to build a fund or reserves of money which will be available for the future generation. In actual sense, as the current generation, you'll be taking responsibility for the future generation, particularly in instances where you are endowed or blessed with minerals, and we know that minerals has got a lifespan, they can deplete, they can go into extinction. So you would want this future generation to know that once upon a time, there were minerals, and this is the money which was generated from minerals. So in terms of commodity booms, where the prices are quite attractive in the global markets, then the country can capitalize on that and milk the excess and put it into a sovereign wealth fund. But also, most importantly, a sovereign wealth fund can also be a key source of funding for the fiscal support for government in times of deficits. It can also be used to stabilize macroeconomic environment in any country. So instead of going to the IMF and the World Bank and look for money, one might want to then dip into the sovereign wealth fund as a kind of budgetary support. That is the context in which we see the occurrence and the genesis of sovereign wealth fund and how they operate. Then there are quite a lot of experience around the world where the sovereign wealth fund are run, and China is one of them. So talk about China, Norway, and Botswana. Botswana very close to home. So in as far as China is concerned, the sovereign wealth fund of China was established through a vehicle called China Investment Corporation on 19 September 2007. And the initial capital was $200 billion coming from excess trade surplus. Today, this sovereign wealth fund is over $2 trillion. And of course, the Chinese government, in line with the tenets and the mandate of the sovereign wealth fund, is making long-term and large investments for the future in various portfolios across the globe. So the Chinese one is mainly driven by surpluses, trade surpluses. I think there was a point in time in 2012 when China had excess reserves of $4.2 trillion. And some of these reserves were invested into sovereign wealth fund. Then, of course, in Norway, they also have a sovereign wealth fund, which is funded by proceeds from gas and oil. And its sovereign wealth fund is around $1.4 trillion. Now coming back home, close to home, Botswana, they have a sovereign wealth fund which they named the Pula Fund. And this Pula Fund is funded by surpluses from diamond proceeds or exports, particularly in times where they're attracting quite good prices. And it's much easier for them because there's a partnership between the government and De Beers or private investors, and government always strategically makes savings into this fund. Now, I want to spend a bit of time talking about the governance. How is the Pula Fund governed? And that's very important because I just want to locate this into intellectual discussion. In terms of governance, in terms of appointment of the board is appointed by the Minister of Finance. It's not appointed by the President, it's appointed by the Minister of Finance. The Reserve Bank of Botswana, Central Bank of Botswana, also has got secondment into the board. And it's very important because of change controls and also to provide oversight on the fund as well. Right? In terms of reporting, right? The fund produces an annual report which is presented to Parliament for accountability purposes. And that is very important because Parliament has got an oversight role. Now, what I like most is the issue of audit. The fund is audited by external auditors every year, and that report, the audit report, is presented to Parliament by the Minister of Finance for scrutiny, oversight, and again, build transparency. This is how the international experience reflect sovereign wealth fund. Now, let's come back home and talk about Mutapa Investment Fund. If you look back 10 years back, we in 2012, there was a discussion around the need for the establishment of the sovereign wealth fund. And that discussion took about 2 years, which saw the establishment of the sovereign wealth fund through a sovereign wealth fund act, which was promulgated in 2014. And like other sovereign wealth fund, its objective was to provide safe capital reserves of foreign currency for long-term and large-scale investments. Again, to save money for the future generation, to provide budgetary support and macroeconomic stabilization, right? And in terms of sources of funds, like other international norms or in line with international practices, our sovereign wealth fund was supposed to be benefiting from the mineral reserves which we have in terms of excess or surpluses, which particularly coming from our state-owned mining companies, and of course also from reserves of foreign currency, privatization of state-owned enterprises, budget surpluses, if we were going to make that possible. So of interest is that this sovereign wealth fund was formed in 2014. 5 panel board members were appointed, and I recall that Dr. Kombo Moyana, and may his soul rest in peace, was the chairman, and there were 5. And nothing happened between 2014 and this year, up to September, when the new statutory instrument should be 156 was promulgated by the president through temporary presidential measures. So there was a shift of name from sovereign wealth fund to Mutapa Investment Fund. So when I sit, I'm not really worried about the name. I don't know what others think about it. I'm worried about now the change, the structural changes to what constitutes a sovereign wealth fund in Zimbabwe, and how it is structured, and the accompanying legal framework, as well as governance matters, which are attached to the sovereign wealth fund of Zimbabwe. That's where I'm quite concerned. But before I raise my concern, let me try to unpack the basics which I observed, and some of them are quite legal, and I'm sure Honorable BT will go deeper into those areas. But from the top of my head, and as a layman, some of these legal issues. The first thing is that this new change was effected through a statutory instrument. It's not go through the parliament as we expect. And I still want to see the intervention. I'm trying to challenge my brother. I hope he's here, Honorable BT, to then clarify to us to say, is it possible for a statutory instrument to effect changes to an act of parliament. I know that's a question which is troubling me. But again, I still want to push again to Honorable Bit. Maybe Chair, as you are noting, it might not have been in. Is it procedural for the president to exercise temporary presidential measures on a matter that is not urgent? If it was cyclone which is ravaging, one would understand that the president has to kick in and make decisions because we are serving, there's a national disaster. So this program amalgamation worries, and I will talk about the implications that on my third part of presentation. And of course, it's important to note that unlike the Botswana Cooler Fund, because I want to come closer home, China is too big. Norway is too far away from us. Botswana, I've said that in terms of appointment, is the Minister of Finance. In our case, it is the president who appoints the board. It is the president who appoints the CEO. It is the president who appoints the chief investment officer. And these people report to the president. And again, most importantly, they don't report to anyone else, even to parliament, they don't. They produce a report which goes to president, annual report. So again, it takes away the public scrutiny, the oversight of the parliament. And in any setup, there's no way by any standard, we are in Africa, where anyone can stand up and challenge the president to account for what is happening in the sovereign wealth fund. We are African. We are Zimbabweans. It's not possible. But the members of parliament, they've got that probity role to challenge the sovereign wealth fund on behalf of the citizen. Now, if the highest office has been given that mandate, and if you challenge naturally, there are consequences because
you're breaking up there.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Gift, you're breaking up.
Hello? Tony? So
yes, we can hear you. You can continue.
Thank you. So that worries a little in the space going forward, how we are going to provide oversight. Now, the other point is that these workers, the employees and the members of the Mutapa Investment Fund, have to sign official secret. So they cannot divulge any matter to any public body. So again, it takes away the scrutiny, which is critical for purposes of accountability and oversight. Now, contrary to in terms of how this fund is going to be financed, yes, it take note of the excesses, surpluses in trade, surpluses in minerals which we are exporting, revenue in terms of revenue, but in a new fashion way which I have not seen, it is now encompassing 20 state-owned enterprises to be part of the structure of the Mutapa Investment Fund. Of concern is the fact that, again, it's part of the legal framework which has seen the promulgation of the Mutapa Investment Fund through the Statutory Instrument 156 of 2023. Again, the fund is exempted from procurement laws and disposal of assets act. So again, it's a black box. It's naturally you would want to have a situation whereby the fund there's transparency in terms of the procurement processes to guarantee that there is no corruption and there's proper efficient use of resources, and that everyone is accountable and it violates again the constitutional provision of transparency and accountability of state-owned enterprises. And then, of course, one area which is also part of the provision of the legal framework is that the fund that should not have any restriction of exchange controls. So if they want to move money out, there should not be any delay. or any restriction. Money is coming in, no restriction, no delay. We are a country which is quite strong in terms of exchange controls. And when those unfettered exemptions are being given, it raises concerns about the motive, and of course, will be justified. And this is coming on the background where we are losing 1.8 billion US dollars every year due to illicit financial flows. Outside that, we are also losing significant amount of money every year through corruption. If those who followed Madam Chiri's audit report, year in, year out. Now, these exemptions and the closure or the removal of oversight, and particularly the move to have these the members and the employees to sign secret official secret act worries, because then if you then have no guarantee that there's no corruption taking place. So it becomes an area of concern. Now, what are the implications? This is my last section. What are the implications of this synopsis, this state of affairs, the manner in which the Mutapa Investment Fund has been crafted? Well, the first one is issues of concern around transparency and accountability, and it raised the premium of the country when it comes to issues of accountability and creating a higher perception around corruption. We all know that every year, global rating agencies, which include Transparency International, there's a perception index on corruption. So one won't be surprised 2024 when we have a higher, a low rating, which will put us on the bottom of the ranking. We used to be hovering around 170 out of 173 for more than 10 years in a consistent manner. So we're beating Afghanistan and Iraq, and we will be on the bottom. But of late, we were around 150 because of some reforms which are being done. But we'll go back, from my perception, from the way I see it, to 178 out of 173. What does it mean in terms of investments? It means that when investors are coming to Zimbabwe, they spend most of their time analyzing existing data on these ratings to say, where does Zimbabwe sit in as far as corruption is concerned? And if you are sitting on the bottom, right, they don't even come and ask the Minister of Finance and Investment Promotion about the investment climate. It's enough, it's a good report card for them to make a decision and move to next door, to Botswana, to Zambia. So that is why you will see that our investments in terms of numbers every year, we are around $250 million, which we get, which is just around 1% of our gross domestic product. That is one implication. The second implication is that you are aware that we're pushing the agenda for reform, state-owned enterprise reforms. Now we can bring them back to the 1994, 1996, where the state-owned enterprises were contributing 60% of gross domestic product, which is in line with international experience, such as China. Now we've unbundled 20 state-owned enterprises. Some of them very critical, like NRZ, COTCO, consumer, the CSC, the Cold Storage Commission, into that bracket. So in actual sense, what it means, the agenda for the reforms of the state-owned enterprises is gone, right? We can forget about it. And likewise, we should also forget about their contribution, possible contribution to the economy. Now, what worries me more in terms of putting together 20 state-owned enterprises into this Mutapa Investment Fund? It's like carrying dead horses. That's what worries me. For example, Zupco, right? These are state-owned enterprises which are not performing very well. Your NRZ, National Railways of Zimbabwe, and your Cold Storage Commission. These companies are not performing. So what miracles are they going to do what value addition are they going to add to this Mutapa Investment Fund? Yet it should be a rich fund which should have excess liquidity for long-term investments. So when you carry these dead horses, what value are you bringing to the fund? Is it going to achieve the expected goals of long-term investment, guaranteeing addressing some infrastructure challenges in the country, and also going global to attract investments? So any investor who looks at our Mutapa Fund and look at the balance sheet will not take us serious. Say, you want us to come and put our money in a dustbin, which is carrying dead horses. That is an area of concern. The other point of concern in terms of the implication is the impact of this decision on our debt negotiation, our debt resolution. Now, I would want to refer colleagues to the first statement which was issued by the president of African Development Bank when he wrote a 6-page press statement summarizing the discussion. The last page, which is page number 6 of that statement, he gave 3 conditions which are very critical for debt resolution. Then, of course, the first one was around constitutionalism, human rights, respect of human rights, a free and fair election. It was one pegged condition. The second one, which is very important, is the issue of reforms of state-owned enterprises and adhering to the staff monitoring program reports from IMF. Now, just today, or yesterday, the IMF has concluded their discussions with Zimbabwe, and they've issued a statement, which is not detailed, but just to give us indication that they are going to issue a detailed statement. But one of the things they raised, they reaffirmed the need for reforms and good governance. Now, can we say the way this Mutapa Fund has been promulgated, there's exercise of good governance? Can we guarantee that going forward, as an economy, we will be reflecting good the global players, because we're in a global village, in as far as our governance process are concerned? So one way of selling our case as a country in debt negotiation is to show seriousness about economic reforms, because that builds the impetus for sincerity, for us to be heard, say we are serious and we are on the ground, which is very critical for us to build sustainability in the economy. Now, this type of fund, remember, together with other things which are happening in the economy, I've just seen this week where the president has promulgated around 13 laws which are now under his office. So you cannot discuss the Mutapa Fund if you are an investor, or look at it as an island or in isolation with the rest of other decisions which are being made in the economy. So in this context, I'm worried that over and above the challenges of debt negotiation, remember the debt negotiation also has got issues which have to do with the electoral disputes, which we have already witnessed. Now, when you factor in then the decision which has been made by the president in his leadership to kind of close all possibility and hope for reforms, then you know that this debt issue it's an issue which is going into the dustbin. Now, what does it mean for the economy? Our risk premium will be very high because we will not have a debt resolution. So it means, one, we are going to get, if we are going to get any capital at a higher premium, this will increase the cost of doing business. We will be getting these loans in US dollars. Now, it's important for colleagues to appreciate that in terms of lines of credit, we get close to 16 to 20% of our total foreign currency receipts in lines of credit. So just imagine in 2022, where we got $12 billion total foreign currency, and about 20% of that is in the lines of credit. So we're talking about $2.4 billion coming to this country, offshore lines of credit to Afrexim Bank. Now, if we are getting that capital if we continue to get the capital and at a higher risk profile, it means this country, this economy, is not going to be competitive. But if we don't get it going forward because our risk premium is higher, again, it means there'll be gnashing of teeth, because we are now a dollarized economy. 94% of our loans are in US dollars. Around 90% of our deposits are in US dollars. So no more Zim dollar to talk about. So we need more liquidity. And this is the impediment which we have in an economy. My last comment, Chair, in regards to the national consensus, to say, as a people, when we make these big decisions and exclude each other, no consultation, no inclusivity, no involvement of the citizens and the parliament in oversight, it becomes them and us. And the danger of that is that those who believe in inclusive and development, building consensus, nation building, would agree with me that when you divide the country, even through your action, by the way you make your laws, you create a polarized environment. Even if people are quiet, they will make decisions which suit them. They don't go with the decisions of government, particularly where they know that this can also have a cost implication on them. So I would have wanted a situation whereby government is inclusive in its approach, so that we have a shared vision on what we are trying to do. And then we have ownership of everything. It becomes easier to implement any policy. This trajectory which government has taken, where they are now saying it's us, we are in charge, and we'll do whatever we want, it's not sustainable. You need to move everyone along. I rest my case. Thank you very much, Chair, for giving me the opportunity. Over to you now.
Thank you, Gift. What a mess we're in. We will have the discussion, some very critical key points to make there. How do we decide to set up an important facility like this outside the ambit of Parliament and lawmakers? How do we insulate functionaries in this entity from scrutiny and accountability by enveloping them in the Official Secrets Act? How do we lump 20 moribund state-owned enterprises into a facility that is supposed to be viable and profitable, a facility anchored on surplus assets? It absorbs entities that are bankrupt. Just a few of the key points. Of course, Tendai will touch on the fundamental legal questions that Gift has raised. It is my pleasure now to both welcome Tendai into the forum and to invite you to share with us your perspectives on this Mutapa Fund. Bearing in mind, the question before us is the Mutapa Investment Fund a legitimate sovereign fund? Tendai, we are observing our time. You have up to 30 minutes. You don't have to use it all, but you're welcome to 30 minutes. And we will come down with a guillotine if you go into deficit. Welcome, Tendai Biti. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doc. Can you confirm that you can hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. Does everybody hear Tendai? Yes, Tendai, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. So I want to touch on the law, then I'll go to the political economy. Firstly, on the law, the president used the Presidential Powers Temporal Measures Act. Section 2, subsection 2 of that act allows him to make regulations. The regulations he makes can actually override an act made by Parliament. So the Presidential Temporal Measures Act allows the president to be parliament, but it allows the president to actually override a parliament. This is made so specific in Section 5 of the Presidential Powers Temporal Measures Act. So the first challenge of the Mutapa Fund is that it is created by a law, the Presidential Temporal Measures Act, that is clearly unconstitutional. In our constitution, we've got Section 134, which makes it clear that only Parliament can exercise plenary law-making powers. And when the President exercises plenary law-making powers that are given to Parliament, he is breaching the doctrine of separation of powers. Remember, when we made the 2013 Constitution, one of the things that we were fighting with was, and fighting against, was the creation of an imperial presidency that had been created in this country in 1987 when Edson Zobo conflated the new creature called an executive president with the functions of the prime minister and the old titular head of state in the form of Kenan Banana to create this sobriquet of an all too powerful imperial president. So when we negotiated the constitution and when we fought for the new constitution of 2013, one of the things that we were fighting to remove was an imperial president. That is why we said Parliament should make laws, the executive should make policy, and the judiciary should provide a judicial scrutiny, judicial oversight through their power of review. So the Presidential Temporal Measures Act is clearly unconstitutional. Running the country by decree, as has been happening particularly since 2017, is dangerous. Number one, it's unconstitutional. Number two, you're excluding a Parliament. And remember, whatever Parliament does, it is obliged in terms of Section 141 to actually consult the public. So when you use the Presidential Temporal Measures Act, you are excluding the public, you are excluding a Parliament. That's illegality number one. Illegality number two is whether the SI 156 of 2023 actually complies with the Presidential Temporal Measures Act. Section 2, subsection 2 says presidential powers should only be used when there is actually an emergency and when no other law can fit or cover that particular emergency. So if you have a flood, if you have a tsunami, if you have got COVID, surely the president can act in terms of those regulations. I submit that number one, the Mutapa Fund is not in the national interest. One of the things that motivates the president to act is that this thing must be in the public interest, viewed from a point of view of the economy, of defense, of public health, or of the national interest. As I will explain later on, this is not in the national interest. Secondly, it's not an agent position to try and privatize shares, to try and pack public shares. It's not agent at all. Thirdly, you didn't need a law to house shares of state-owned enterprise in any vehicle. That doesn't require a law. The government is the shareholder in all those institutions. It can pack them wherever it wants. So the abuse, two abuses have occurred: the abuse of the Constitution and the abuse of the Presidential Temporal Measures Act itself. Now I come to political economy. My greatest concern is that they've defaced the noble idea of a sovereign wealth fund. A sovereign wealth fund in classical economics is a long-term investment fund created for future generations to capture excess surplus existing at the present moment. So that is why most sovereign wealth funds are there to capture commodity resources, mineral resources. So if a country has got abundant natural resources, take Norway with its oil, take Botswana with its diamonds, take the Democratic Republic of Congo with its bauxite, with its manganese, with its copper, and so forth, it can create a sovereign wealth fund. So our sovereign wealth fund was created to actually tap in the excess surplus coming in from our minerals, which is why when you look at the section dealing with the sources of the funding of the sovereign wealth fund, it's all resources, it's all royalties from the huge deposits we have, particularly from diamonds, particularly from platinum, particularly from gold, now lithium. So it's a long-term asset. It's a long-term, asset for future developmental needs. Yes, it can also be used to stabilize the currency for obvious reasons, because it is a reserve, and the reserve of currency, that too is accepted. And Chairman Makoni, you appreciate what I'm talking about. So the law actually allows that to happen. Now, what they've done now, what SI 156 has done, is to deface that noble idea, that long-term idea, and effectively convert the Sovereign Wealth Fund created through the Sovereign Wealth Fund Act of 2014 into an asset management company. An asset management company is a short-term instrument to deal with the securities, to deal with assets, to make them fungible, to dispose of them, to create immediate short-term value. So my first complaint is that you didn't need to deface and delegitimize the Sovereign Wealth Fund in order to create your predatory extractive institution called the Mutapa Sovereign Fund. You should have just created blatantly your Mutapa Fund without affecting and killing the Sovereign Wealth Fund as it stood originally in the 2014 Act, passed and pushed by Patrick Chinamasa. So what do we have now? We now have an instrument that is now primarily funded by these assets from 20 state-owned enterprises that have been put in this fund. We now know that there's no more a developmental aspect contained and captured in the Sovereign Wealth Fund, because the Chief Executive Officer of the Mutapa Fund is actually called an investment officer. An investment officer buys and sells security, buys and sells assets, puts money where most surplus can be extracted. He is a short-term person. It's a short-term agenda. It's a myopic agenda. But it has been done extremely dangerous. The Mutapa Fund excludes serious regulatory scrutiny, which I'm now going to outline. Number one, it operates outside Parliament. But it can't operate outside Parliament, Comrade Makoni, because you a finance minister, you know that all assets in Zimbabwe, whether it's buildings, whether it's money, they belong to what is called a consolidated revenue fund. So those shares are to the credit of the consolidated revenue fund. So any Zimbabwean asset is a consolidated revenue fund. And the consolidated revenue fund allows an appropriation account, which is the budget. I'm not talking about the budget, which is a one-year cycle. But the balance sheet of Zimbabwe is actually the consolidated revenue fund. The consolidated revenue fund is the balance sheet of Zimbabwe. And the constitution is very clear in section 304, 5, 304, 306, 307, that any withdrawal from the consolidated revenue fund actually needs parliamentary approval. Parliament is the boss of the Sovereign Wealth Fund. So they think they've ring-fenced this fund from Parliament, but they've ignored the explicit provisions of Section 304, Section 305, Section 306, which make it clear that Parliament has to be approved. Put simply, there can never be any privatization of any assets in Zimbabwe without parliamentary approval, because a subtraction of or a disposal of a country's assets is a dilution of the consolidated revenue fund, and the consolidated revenue fund cannot be diluted without parliamentary approval. So I hope that parliamentarians will take this up. I hope that constitutional lawyers will take this up, so that there's a declaration from the court and from Parliament itself that no dilution of the Consolidated Revenue Fund can take place without parliamentary approval. Another regulatory authority that has been taken out is the line minister. The line ministries are taken out completely. Yet the line ministries are key because they go to Parliament and provide reports on the performance or non-performance of their parastatals. Every parastatal, by operation of the Public Finance Management Act, is supposed to provide a report to Parliament, which is debated, which is discussed. So by excising, by removing line ministers, you have taken out parliamentary oversight, you've taken out the immediate management oversight, which line ministers exercise over their portfolios, over the state-owned enterprises before them. Then the next board you have also taken out is ZIDA, the Zimbabwe Investment Development Agency. In terms of the investment law, any person who wants to buy any asset in Zimbabwe must be subjected to certain key due diligence oversights described in terms of the Zimbabwe Investment Act. One of the things you can't do in Zimbabwe is to buy an asset without an investment license. What Mutapa Fund now allows anyone to come and buy any share without going through ZIDA and the due process procedures prescribed in the Investment Act. A fourth exclusion is, of course, the privatization agents of Zimbabwe. You know, Mr. Chairman, that we have got a privatization agent of Zimbabwe which went through serious expert studies, site visits, comparative visits to actually come up with a manual on how privatization is done, which involves due process, due diligence, and so forth. So the privatization best practice positions have actually been taken out. So let me just give you one example. ZESA is one of the assets that is in the Mutapa Fund. ZESA is $1 billion asset. Its generation capacity is around 2,000 megawatts. You can't install 2,000 megawatts today at today's prices without spending at least $6 billion. Then it has got a countrywide transmission network. Yes, it's poor, but it is there. Then it has got the retail side, the smart meters that are now in our homes, the street lights that are in Zengeza, in Dotito, and in Chendambuya, and in Makoni too. All that is infrastructure. So someone is now just going to come and go and see this chief executive officer. And you are smiling because there's no electricity in Makoni. I apologize. So someone who is just going to come nocturnal and buy this asset, it's just ridiculous. Then of course the Reserve Bank has been taken out. The Reserve Bank is the exchange control authority of Zimbabwe, and no transaction can be done in Zimbabwe that involves the exchange of foreign currency without exchange control regulations. You know the 1996 exchange control regulations and the sacrosanct Section 11 of those. That has been taken out as well. Another law, another regulatory scrutiny that has been taken out is the procurement authority of Zimbabwe. The procurement law doesn't apply, so these assets can be sold. But it's really mafia, it's really extractive, because one of the biggest weaknesses about this fund is that we don't know the values of the shares that have been transferred to the Mutapa Fund, and that is criminal. What is the value of the ZESA shares? You were saying, I was listening, that the NRZ is broke, but that's a trading account. Its balance sheet is unbelievable because it has got railway stock that cuts across the length and breadth of that country. Has anyone valued that? No one is valued, that. The post office savings bank, which is also there, yes, its trading account is in the red, but its balance sheet, it has got massive assets. There is a post office every little corner of Zimbabwe, including at Juru, Growth Point, Murewa, Growth Point, Lotito, Growth Point, Mount Darwin, Growth Point. What is the value of that? So I submit that it was criminally irresponsible to create and to force the transfer of shares from these state-owned enterprises without valuing them. And are you going to mix them? Are you going to mix? What is the balance sheet of the Mutapa Fund? Can you honestly create a balance sheet that mixes the shares of the Cold Storage Commission and the shares of DESA and the shares of Kuvimba and the shares of the GMB company? It's criminal. Separate books have to be created, but is that being done? Of course, we know that it is not being done. So this monster called the Mutapa Fund is actually irrational. It's actually irrational. It defies logic. Why would you mix the unmixable? So two things explain the irrationality. Number one, the shares of these state-owned enterprises have been put in the Mutapa Fund. But we all know that all these state-owned enterprises are highly indebted. So ZESA alone is drowning with debts that are in excess of $3 billion US. A large component of that debt is, of course, the debt coming from the construction of Hwange 7 and 8. Then they've got their own normal, usual, recurrent debt coming from the fact that we've not been able to pay for our exports to HBC and to ESCOM in South Africa, and as well as to some companies in the DRC. So it's huge debt. So all those parastatals are highly indebted, but the debt is remaining with the shelf now, with the shelf of the parastatal. So we, the taxpayers, now we have to assume, because I can assure you there will be Debt Assumptions Act by Mthuli Ncube of that debt. While some people are going to benefit from the opaque privatization of those shares that is going to be done through this instrument called the Mutapa Fund. But these are important assets. This economy, the Rhodesians created this economy, although they hated the word socialist. This, for all intents and purposes, was a monopoly state capitalist country, run on the basis of 102 parastatals that contributed to 60% of GDP, the National Railways of Zimbabwe, the Grain Marketing Board, the Air Zimbabwe's of this world, the post offices, of this world. So in one swoop, they've literally collapsed 60% of the country's, GDP, the impact it is going to have on employment. But it's not surprising because they've just done that again with our carbon credits, which have been sold and discounted to a Saudi Arabian company. 7.5 million hectares of land are going. Again, there's no parliamentary scrutiny. We have not seen that agreement. So the bottom line, Comrade Chair, is that by the time we are in August of 2028, the date of the next election, I don't think Zimbabwe will have any balance sheet. I don't think there will be anything in that, in the consolidated revenue fund. So this is extraction of the most unmitigated reform, one which would make Cecil John Rhodes very embarrassed. I want to tell you some history before I conclude. In 1895, the colonialists got so embarrassed by the looting that they were doing. So they created what was called a loot committee, which was chaired by the late Thomas Mikos, to actually regulate their looting and extraction of Southern Rhodesia. It wasn't known as Southern Rhodesia then. I suspect that Zimbabwe needs a new form of loot committee. I thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Tendai. Again, a very clear, lucid analysis, which begs the question, why are these things being done? I saw Janet, but I don't see her right now on my screen. Janet, are you with us right now? I don't know if she has dropped out, but...
Okay. So,
sorry?
Yeah. Yeah, I can't see her either. So I'll let you know if she
You
does
can't
come
see
in.
her either.
Yeah, I can't see
But she
either,
did
so
appear
open
briefly
it up.
on my screen.
Yeah.
All right. I was saying a very clear, lucid analysis. If we combine what Gift and I have told us, I suggest it begs the question, why are things being done this way, this brazenly, this arrogantly, and in breach of the Constitution, of the Sovereign Wealth Fund Act? It boggles the mind. The analysis is clear. I want to suggest that in our discussion, we try and examine what can be done about this. Surely 16 million Zimbabweans cannot be robbed in broad daylight and they acquiesce to it. On the bottom of the screen, there is an area that's marked reactions. On there are various things you can do. One of which is important for our discussion is to raise your hand. That signals to me that you would like to make a contribution, and I will gladly grant you the floor. Who wants to take the first bite? Tony Rila, what do you think?
Okay. Yeah, the fall guy. I mean, what's going through my head in the Southern African region, where increasingly, and we've just come out of it, Zimbabwe has just managed, for some reason that is difficult to understand, get out of being grey listed. South Africa's being grey listed. We have a multiplicity of reports emerging about illicit financial flows flowing between North and South of the Limpopo. Now, the big question I'm asking in this, is this a mechanism for excessive money laundering? I mean, both Gift and Tendai have raised the fact that this fund is beyond the scrutiny of anybody at all. So is this a massive opportunity for huge amounts of money laundering? And that's a very serious issue in two countries. It's a major issue for both Zimbabwe and South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. We've just escaped grey listing. For how long? With this murky, opaque animal that we've just created, beyond the scrutiny of any authority, not parliament, not line ministries, not cabinet, not citizens either. Who wants to come next? Thank you, Rusty. And then Kamunu. Go ahead, Rusty.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Tendai. Thanks, Gift. Very good presentations. I'd just like to look at it from a slightly different angle. If you change the reason for forming Mutapa from being for the national interest to being for your personal interest, it starts making sense. Just a simple change of the name. If you're going to start externalizing funds, or if you're going to start looking at illicit funds, you want to dissociate the name Zimbabwe from it and away from the Sovereign Wealth Fund, including where the assets came from. The acquisition of these assets, in my view, if you take, for example, ZESA, which was named, and the National Railways of Zimbabwe, you have a massive asset value and also a significant debt. The way this has been structured, in my view, is the debt will be left with the government and the assets will be privatized. Most of the debt, or a lot of the debt, refers to wages and unpaid liabilities, but the assets can be used pretty quickly. And I'd like to relate it to the Russian era of glasnost, where all the Russian assets were basically liquidated, or state-owned enterprises were liquidated and sold to oligarchs who were very closely related to the political elite. And I see that happening here. Now, when you look at Parliament, for example, the oversight of Parliament has been reduced and decapitated. The Constitution has been reduced and decapitated. The public interference for transparency and accountability has also been reduced and decapitated. So when you talk about the selection of the 20 state-owned enterprises, look at them carefully, and you'll see you've got a mixture. Some are companies with boards, some are shareholders, and some of them are just small state-owned, but they have an asset base. Now, the asset might not be physical. If you take something like Zupco, it's basically a monopoly for mass transport. It's ideal for sale, but for personal gain because there's no oversight. So I believe that is the reason it's been done. There is no benefit to the nation for these two statutory instruments. Thank you.
Thank you, Rusty. Kamunu.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you everybody for their presentations. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you clearly.
With clarity.
Thank you. Chairman, my first question is, you refer to 16 million Zimbabweans, and I'm just wondering if there is 16 million Zimbabweans. I get a sense that this country has no people in it. And why do I say that? We've just had a stolen election and nobody has reacted to it. So if there were 16 million people, where are the 16 million people? Why did they not react? That is my first question. The second one is, I've attended SAPE's meetings for quite a long time, and I hear very pointed discussions, which all come to naught because nothing ever happens. And I'm always wondering whether we are ever going to get anything done, and if so, by who? You have a Chabangu that just fell off a tree the other day and has nullified the votes of many millions of people to an extent where you can almost write off all the 2 million people that voted CCC, and nothing is going to be done about it. They are going to get away with it, and this thing continues. So, Chairman, for me, everything I'm going to say, which is about 3-4 points, is all around whether there are any people in Zimbabwe, and if there are any people in Zimbabwe, what it will take for them to react. We were reading the other day, Chairman, in the press that Chidakwa was abducted in the middle of town, and he screamed, and nobody lifted an eyebrow. So you say to yourself, well, there was nobody in town. That's why Chidakwa was abducted. He was left for dead, and we are where we are today. We have seen in the last 18 months, Chairman, 82 statutory instruments that have undermined the Constitution. Clearly, we have no Constitution. So I'm not sure that we are doing justice to ourselves. And I'm just curious to have somebody tell me that everything I've just said is rubbish and why it is rubbish. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Do you mind if I ask if you're Zimbabwean?
Yes, I am Zimbabwean
Kamunu,
chairman.
are you there?
Yes, I am
Okay.
Zimbabwean chairman.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So you and I owe you answers to your questions.
Correct.
All right. That is the purpose or part of the purpose of our engagement this evening and the others that you have attended before and other activities involving other compatriots. A clearly profound question. If Zimbabweans are there and they see all this and they are concerned about it, if not hurt by it, why aren't they doing something about it? What can we do? Who wants to point us to what can be done? I do not see any hand raised. We have come to share ideas to analyze our situation in this particular respect and to seek solutions to the problems. So I know we have great active minds as I look across my screen and I see the names here. Let me provoke us. Let's share. Who wants to speak next?
Can I come in? Can I come in?
With pleasure. Who are you?
I think my name is there. I think that my name is Tendai. I think that that's the million.
Okay, Tendai.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question that Mr. Kamono asked. I've always argued that we as Zimbabweans have to provide the agency, agency. When we fought the struggle for decolonization, those that came before us, including you, Dr. Makot, you provided the agency. Not only did you provide the agency, agency, you also provided the agency, urgency, agency and agency. So we have this mindset that we can outsource our struggle. We can't outsource our struggle. I said the other day in a discussion with Blessing Muflanga that if your house is broken down, it's in a state of dilapidation, you can't ask your neighbor to paint that house for you, to repair that house for you. Your neighbor can come and lend you a ladder or a wheelbarrow. So I think what is missing is the agency and the agency. We're not angry enough, and we have normalized the abnormal. These things don't shock us at all. I can assure you that if you were to do a poll in Zimbabwe, very few people would know what creature you are talking about when you refer to the Mutapa Fund. Very few people would know that 7.5 million hectares of their land is gone to the Middle East. So to me, it's about agency, it's about urgency, and that is lacking. Bob Marley once saying, "None but ourselves can free ourselves," and that appropism remains as true as it was in 1976 when he composed that song, as it is today, the 26th of October, in the year of our Lord, 2023.
Thank you, Tendai. Useful analysis, comparison still begs the question, if we could generate the courage, the fortitude, the stamina, the commitment to have agency and urgency in the 70s, why can't we do it now? I see Ibo, after Ibo, Ringisai, after Ringisai, there was a third hand, it's just gone down. Ibo, after you, Ringisai. Thank you. Ibo, can you hear me? David, can you confirm?
Ibo, you're muted.
Sorry, Simba, sorry. Technology, handikunda pana. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Can
yes.
you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me, Simba?
Ibo, can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Who is muted? Ibo or me? No, I'm not
No,
muted.
I'm
Muringa,
unmuted now.
you're online. Thank you. Very well,
Thanks,
thank you.
Simba. No, thanks.
Yes,
I
we
just
can.
want to first very, very, very much
yes, Ibo, I can hear you. Please
the
go ahead.
discussion so far.
Thank you.
It's incredible in terms of the wealth of information, both Gift and Simba and Tendai. We're glad that we raised the subject. Retrospectively, as Tendai says, very few people know about this Mutapa Fund, but we gathered from the discussion that BT had before, and indeed the surreptitious way in which this thing has been put up, that there was need to put it in the public domain, and I believe we have done so. And thanks to you, Simba, and Gift and Tendai. And yes, I have to follow up on the question of agency and agency. What is to be done is the point, because now I'm sorry to say, but basically the oversight that is usually provided by a robust opposition in any country is not there. It's porous, it's decimated, it's in tatters. Parliament itself, where Tendai, BT, and others were, is no longer a place to talk about. We're in a mess. What do we do? How do we raise agency in the first instance? How do we, as Chester Mende Kamunu was saying earlier on, how do we progress from pure discussions such as we have to social action and intervention? How do we stop this nonsense called the Mutapa Fund, which is nothing less than a cartel looting, if one may put it very bluntly? How do we stop it? We don't want to leave here just having discussed with no resolution as to how to move forward. I plead that we conclude this discussion with some kind of plan of action, how to confront this mess as I've seen it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibo. Before I give the floor to Ringisai, I just pose a question for our reflection, especially the lawyers among us, Tendai and others. I know that we all believe that the judiciary is captured, but is there no value in a citizen class action to challenge these illegalities that have been catalogued so well by both Gift and Tendai? Ringside, over to you.
Thank you so much, Doc, and thank you so much to Prof. Mganu and Advocate BT for really providing us with this solid information. I think what I wanted to contribute is on 2 points. The first is the extent to which the civic body has been decimated, especially in the last 3-4 years. Where COVID and other repressive rules and legislation have been put in place to utterly dismember the civic body. I think people like Jacob Ngaruvume, Tsisidanga Rembwa, Hope Wechingono have tried in the civic space to the extent of doing it as individuals to say there is need to take a stand. There's a greater sense of Zimbabweans having moved to self-preservation, into a stage of self-preservation. And this applies the same to social movements. if we still can define any in that sense. We have been really browbeaten into submission. The events of November 2017, followed by the 1st of August 2018, followed by January 2019, and then the massive and restrictive COVID measures really have put that body into a position of self-censorship, and we fear so much. There is so much fear amongst us. There is so much fear, and we've been shown what can happen if you do dare. If you have been lucky to be left off the hook, but people like Jacob Ngarivume and Job Scala are still languishing in prison, and really a few of us are willing to take that step to go to prison for what we believe in. Then the question is, do we really actually have anything we believe in strongly? Is this our Zimbabwe, or is, as Advocate Tendai would say, we are willing to outsource it with a hope, a prayer, and a song? The second thing is really the absence of leadership. And I'm not really referring to political leadership, but leadership amongst the citizens. Anyone who is really able to galvanize people in small spaces. There is obviously the national level, but where we are, I think we need multiple tactics to begin to eat into this animal. And I agree with what you've just mentioned now, Dr. Makoni, that multiple efforts have to be put, even as we know that the courts are unlikely to rule in our favor. But can the efforts be put and be recorded and be documented? Can forums and spaces begin to openly, so we're doing this online, maybe we move it to the physical body. Can we begin to have these conversations in various parts of the country? It reminds me of how Professor Mutambara has gone the whole country trying to popularize his book. The same can be done about these things. Yes, people do know them, but there's a lot of fear as individuals. This is only the latest. Nothing has been done about the Century Report. Nothing has been done about the gold mafia. Nothing has been done about all the other very detailed reports on how the country is really being looted and pillaged. And nothing has been done. There is really, in the civic space, a lack of anyone who is willing to pick this up as conversations to take further. I don't know, is it that we are caught up in our projects, we are caught up in survival, but this space is really, leadership is really lacking. Some of us in our spaces will continue to write, but that is not enough. I suppose I don't also have a good answer besides saying that there's so much fear, and the state has understood the citizen that it is working with, and it understands just how far it can push the envelope and draw it back. And it understands so much that there is unlikely to be any serious consequences to its action, including lack of protests, people or boots on the ground right in the streets. I think we need, I agree with Dr. Ibu on this one, that I don't know how to get there, but my mind is, could we find leadership even amongst ourselves? Could we begin to discuss how do we disseminate this further? Maybe in bite size, using local spaces that are available, just to get the people to think about what is really happening and if we want this for the next 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Ringisai. Key pointers there. Can we create a platform around the Century Report, the Gold Mafia?
Simba, you cut off again. Are you still there? Simba? Hello, Simba? Okay, all right. I'll feed in. Technology.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Simba.
All right. Ibo, thank you, Tony. I will come to you just now, but I see Ibo's hand is still up. Is that a new hand or the old hand?
Old hand.
All right. Tony,
technology deficient.
Tony, you have the floor.
Okay, so we've raised, in respect of this really important issue, the issue of agency. And I would suggest that this platform tonight touches on one of the key aspects of agency. It's conventional to talk about agency in two ways. One is voice, to say what I think and what I believe. And the second is participation. Now, it's very clear that Zimbabweans are very, very cautious about what they say in public. And that's been amplified massively in the last 12 months by the PVO bill and the Patriot bill, that people will not say what they think in a broad way because they're fearful that they will be targeted. Now, there's a very interesting book by a very interesting man from Ghana, George Ayeti, who talks in his book about bringing down a dictatorship. And one of the things he talks about at the beginning is voice, is to say what you think. Now, I hear voice all over the place in social media and everywhere else. And people connect that to leadership or lack of leadership. But the clear issue is the way in which the space for voice has been closed down in this country. You just have to read the newspapers and you have to look at where the messages to people go. So the challenge is for citizens that they begin to speak out. Now, I don't think that's trivial because of the fact that Ringasai just raised, which is fear. But I want to deconstruct that just a little bit because it's not just fear. There's another fact, and that is that Zimbabweans have lost faith. They've lost some really important commodity in socio-political life, and that's called political trust. And endless studies show that since 1999, we do not trust the state, we do not trust the government, we do not trust political parties, we do not trust the people who run it. And that goes to the heart of what we're discussing tonight, is a way in which a mechanism has been put in place to create the same extractive processes that have been going on forever. Now, this is the biggest challenge for Zimbabwe. I see it every single day in driving on the road, in which a rule-based society gets broken every single day by individual opportunism. Now, that individual opportunism is what is destructive of our society. So when we begin to see that we are us, then you begin to develop some important agency. And that's the deconstruction of our political system. It's an extractive country, and extractive down to the lowest levels. Now, when everybody uses that word, they always have a sense of pessimism that extraction can carry on forever. Well, history will tell you that extractive regimes never, ever last. They don't. It's a question of time. And what changes that is it changes what we always speak about on these platforms, is the individual citizen. Now, this dialogue is being watched tonight by 18 people. Some of these dialogues have been watched by 7,000 people. The question is, what will you say tomorrow to somebody else about what you actually think? That's the fundamental thing. And when Ringasai and people talk about the fact that we liberated this country, it was because the people talked to each other and they spoke with each other and then they acted. That's the fundamental problem. Now, I don't know how long that's going to take. And in relation to this particular problem, what needs to get out there really fast, and I hope that between Tendai and Gift, that this thing can be mined and turned into simple explorations of ordinary people to understand that they're stealing your future. That needs to get out there fast and furious. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. You say we don't trust the government, we don't trust this or entity. I see you, Terence, I'll come to you just now. I think to me, it begs the question, do we trust ourselves? It's not difficult to understand why we don't trust those entities you mentioned, but do we trust ourselves enough to mobilize among ourselves? Second observation you make is about lawlessness, and you use the example of our streets. But what we are discussing today, in my view, is the highest state of lawlessness. One individual, maybe with a few cronies around him, decides to disregard the constitution of the land and several laws that Tendai listed there in order to create a vehicle for himself and themselves as few people. I think that's the highest level of lawlessness. Terence, your turn. Take us forward. What is to be done? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Doc, and thanks to SAPES for organizing this very important space. I want to be a bit of a devil's advocate here, Doc. I joined the space a little bit late. I was in another engagement, but I hope this was also addressed to say, at some point, I think as a country, we also need to begin to discuss, issues around how to create, a bourgeois that has got a national character, or what political economists would call a national bourgeois that is the national interests at heart. I know in 1980 we did inherit a national bourgeois that was very white in character and nature, and that was anchored on the white agrarian bloc. To some extent, I think until after the onset of the fast track land reform in 1980, when it was then decimated, we seem not to have had this national bourgeois that is national in character, indigenous, and serving the interests of the nation. What I am seeing from particularly the actions of President Mnangagwa under the new dispensation has been this move to try and create a national bourgeois. But of course, we may argue around its intentions and its purpose, particularly when we look at the manner in which it has done, which is based more on cronyism and the creation of oligarchs instead of, a real national bourgeois that is national in character and that is inclusive of everyone. Like you say, and like many of the speakers that I've listened to have pointed out, there seems to be, a very narrow definition of this national bourgeois, very narrow also in terms of its political character, as far as it is, basically a crony capitalist bourgeois. But at some point, I think we also need to have this discussion around how do we create, a national bourgeois that can really fit into the developmental aspirations of Zimbabwe as a nation. And I think, of course, it really starts with, defining that national vision, for the country. Are we going to remain a country whose economy is anchored on the extractives or on primary production in agriculture or in mining? And if so, how are we going to ensure that our indigenous business class is able to equitably participate, in the building of this national bourgeois? So I think as part of our conversations going forward, Doc, this needs to be a very, very big discussion. I think it allows us in one way or the other to preempt, some of these narrow definitions and actions towards creating a national bourgeois, which we obviously see is extractive and narrow in its sense and cannot be, does not allow, the equitable participation of all citizens that want to participate in the economic affairs of the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Terence. You touched on the issue of the national question. And the aspect you highlight is the national bourgeoisie, but the whole question of the national question since 1980 has been avoided and sidestepped. If those of us here haven't watched or read the discussion that Tendai Biti, Nigel Chanakira, and Chris Mutangwa participated in at the CEO Roundtable, and particularly the anguish with which Nigel Chanakira and Nick Vingirai asked Chris Mutangwa, "Isu hatisiwo vene vayo here?" I think it resonates very strongly with what Terence has just been saying, and it's a very important point, especially talking about the national bourgeoisie and who participate in the political economy for the benefit of the people rather than for their own benefit. Very, very pointed conversation there, Terence. Thank you very much. I don't see any hand up. I want to encourage us. We still have a little time. More ideas, more views. I haven't heard. Oh, I see Janet is in the meeting now. Janet, welcome. And are you ready to make your contribution? I know you haven't followed the whole discussion, but I also know that you do have issues, information, and analysis that would still be of benefit to us, even though you missed the early part of the discussion. Janet, can you hear me?
I think she's gone again. She's having
I think she's just
connectivity
dropped.
problems.
All right. Paul, I see your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Prof, and thank you to Professor Ibo as well as the SAPES Trust for organizing this. It's a very timely discussion, and my point was on the issue of strategic litigation, because much as the analysis is telling us that the judiciary in Zimbabwe has been badly compromised, as is the case in many other African countries, I think Zimbabwean civic society has come up with strategies of trying to force the courts, even in that very compromised environment, trying to force the courts to remember that they're supposed to be independent. So there's been a number of strategic litigation cases. The one I have in mind is ZELA, the Zimbabwe Environment Lawyers Association, which was able to bring about significant political pressure around the coal-fired plant project that was going to be built in the Hwange National Park. I'm sorry if I don't pronounce it properly, but there was a case like that I was following, and the Zella website it takes you through a step-by-step, blow-by-blow process under which even when it was going to be built, it was a joint project of the Zimbabwe government and the Chinese conglomerate, and the pressure was so intense that the embassy came out and said that they were supporting the legal process in Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe government had to begrudgingly cancel that particular project. But even that cancellation, Zella insisted that it was continuing with its strategic litigation at the High Court because it wanted to set up a legal precedent for future engagements of that kind between the Zimbabwe government and its foreign partners. So I think that was one example, and there are quite a number of others, but I think that's one example of how strategic litigation can create awareness, can create the necessary political pressure, even though the courts are not independent, as we have rightly said. So I just wanted to throw that on the table. I think strategic litigation could be a very interesting tactic that could be employed in this particular case. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. There is value. The platform will be presented for sharing the information around this and other related activities. Whether you win or lose the case, there will have been a public arena of disclosure and shaming and naming. Any other contributions? I see none. I would like to go back to Gift and Tendai in the reverse order. You have the opportunity in 5 minutes to do a summary, both of your earlier observations, if there's anything you want to highlight, but also your reflection on the discussion and the takes that we have shared in light of your presentations. Advocate Biti, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, well, look, I will not restate what I've said in the substance of my, contribution. Just to say that at the end of it all, stripped of all niceties and jargon, it's about our politics, which is extractive, our politics, which is ugly, our governance, system. So the elephant in the living room is how do we address that politics? Normatively, we are supposed to address it through elections, but elections don't work in Zimbabwe. So which is why I come back to the issue of agency and urgency. We have to do more as Zimbabweans. Otherwise, we'll be stuck in this rut for decades to come. Young people are leaving Zimbabwe. 73% of our professionals are outside, Zimbabwe. So it's an indictment. It's an indictment. We have to address this country. We have to resolve the national question. We have to deal with the institutions. We have to deal with the systems. We have to create a new social contract. We have to create a new consensus. We have to create a new narrative. It seems like 44 years after independence, we are trapped in a rut. The characters may go, the topics may change, but the fundamental question remains the same: the crisis of governance, the crisis of leadership, the crisis of extractive institutions. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, there was the Pawinis of this world, the scandals, the wheel of scandals, whatever scandals. Today, it's the same story, it's the same narrative. Characters change, days change, specific factors change, but the essential nature of the crisis has not changed. And surely it's time to change and alter that base and infrastructure. And it lies in our hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Tendai. Allow me to welcome a veteran of these dialogues. I see Daniela has just joined us. What a pity, because I'm sure you would have had something profound to say about what we are discussing. I'm quite happy to offer you a slot, Dan, if you feel like it, but welcome. It's good to see you. Dan, all right, reflect on it. I just wanted, before going to Gift, to pick up on a key point about leadership. And I hope it won't sound like the old guard are abdicating, but please just reflect on when our nationalist movement started and look at the age profile of those who led the nationalist movement all the way up to independence. It was the young people. there's a particular challenge to the youths of these countries. One of us mentioned how many of them are leaving the country. We feel the solution is to run away. The solution is to stay at home and fight for change. So those among us who are this side of 40, you have a particular responsibility for taking us forward in the manner that the struggle for political independence promised but never came to realize. Gift, would you like to share some reflections in closing?
Yes, Doc.
Sorry,
thank you very much.
Sorry, Gift, I see. Sorry, Gift. Can I just sit on you for a minute? I see Kamunu's hand is up again. You're welcome, Kamunu, to share.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to make two observations, and thank you for giving me the opportunity. And I'm abusing the fact that the space is available. The first one, Chairman, is all of us have seen a clip where the president says, "We are the government, we are the army, we are the police, we are everything." I would like just to remind us all that that in itself tells us why we don't have a constitution. The second one is the point you make about the
Kamunu, we've lost you. Are you there? I think Kamunu's network may have dropped. I don't hear him anymore. Do you hear him, other colleagues?
Okay. Can you hear me now, Chairman?
Oh. Yes, you're back.
Can you hear
Thank
me
you.
now? The
yes,
second one is I was saying last week I was attending. I attended a lecture about fatherhood and what is a father. I came out of that lecture with a clear message that our Father is God. And I say to myself, and I think partially this is an answer to the point you make about the youth of today. Most of our youth of today, Chairman, have no identity. How many of our youths identify themselves by their totem? How many of our youths communicate in their mother language? We've made our children either Christians or white men when we are Black people in this nation. And I think we will need to address that as well, along with all the other things that I think we need to address. I just submit that for what it is worth, Chairman, those two items.
Thank you. Again, very important aspects of the national question. What identifies us as Zimbabweans? Is it the color of our skin? Is it where we live? Is it what we feel? And again, a critique of the post-independence nation state and its failings in addressing the national question. Very, very important point you make there, Kamunu. Thank you very much. Gift, your closing reflections. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doc, and colleagues, for your interventions and also the kind comments. I want to start by saying you raised a fundamental point at the end, Chairman, where you were saying where the young people of today are to take up action and hold those in government to account. Tony raised something quite interesting that people would fear, and the government is quite vindictive. I'm sure we've seen how any dissenting voices which they are raised, they come very hard on those voices. you recall the 1 August 2018, right? And of course, the 15-16 January 2019 shooting when citizens were demonstrating over elections and also the issue of price of fuel, respectively. And Zimbabweans are not dumb. They look at it and say, if I am demonstrating over fuel increase and I'm short, how can I go against the Mutapa Fund? In particular, they don't even understand it because they don't know how it reported in their pocket. Honorable Biti said something very profound, that if you do a survey and try to check who understands it, many people don't understand it. But they were rained down during the fuel increase because that affected them. So fear is in people. Intellectuals, I will tell you one thing which I observed. I was kicked out of the University of Zimbabwe for commenting. And from that time when I was kicked out, my colleagues went on mute. You know, they went on mute. They can't comment. They're afraid of following the same path I followed. You saw I was kicked out of Zim Trade Board for raising my democratic opinions. And you think other colleagues in the other board will speak when they know that they'll be kicked out. A minister, a full minister, when he's assuming a new mandate, his mission first is to kick Mugana out of Zim Trade Board. Does it make sense to you? So when you use your common sense, you then say, I'm a Zimbabwean, I've been kicked out by a Zimbabwean. I would think that is different from the colonial regime, where you have this clear agitation to say, this is my opponent. Now, if your other brothers kicking you out, where do you get the willpower to fight back your own brother? So that's my personal view. But as I conclude, Chair and colleagues, I would want to challenge Zimbabweans, and obviously I know here, there'll be one or two intelligence people who will be watching at CIO at these platforms, that as long as government continue to make these decisions, which are unilateral, which are impinging on the constitution and good governance, they are deepening the crisis on confidence. Because the country has got a serious deficit of confidence. So I believe, and I'm convinced, that at one point in time, something will give in. It could be the economy which will give in. This is not sustainable. And I want you, Chairman and colleagues, to mark my view, that people can be quiet, that's my last point, but silence is action. Silence is action. We are all family people. If everyone just keep quiet on you, it's action. And something will give in that silence. So, but the worst thing which is going to happen is that the economy is going to give in. And I believe that one day we'll find each other. I raise my case, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Gift. You raise a very important question in my mind when you describe those who are oppressing us, who are killing us, who are stealing away from us as our brothers. What defines our brother and our sister? Is it just that ethnically we belong? Is it just that we have the same color of skin? If the oppression we suffered before independence separated us from the oppressor then, was it just because of the color of skin or ethnicity? Again, this brings us back to the elusive national question. Even Kamunu's question about our youths and the language they use and what they prefer to eat still is an aspect of the national question. What identifies us as Zimbabweans? Why would I say Gift is my brother, but Dan is not? or so and so is not. It's not questions I think we can answer, I would be able to answer in this session, but they build up to the issues that need to be engaged if we are to develop a united nation with a common identity, a common vision, and a common future. Colleagues, it's been my privilege to moderate this session. I tried my best. It's a rich issue. We were engaging, profound implications, not just for today, but for the future. And I want to thank you for participating. I want to thank you for being here and hope that I see Danny is raising his hand. I had provoked him to say something. Daniel, you're welcome. I give deference to you in 2 minutes.
Yes, to unmute.
Daniel, you need to unmute yourself. Hello, Dan, are you unmuted? Maybe there's something wrong with his system. I can't hear him. Can anybody hear him?
No.
Dan, would you put your microphone on? David, can you help him?
Yes, I've asked him to unmute.
He is still muted. Oh dear. I'm sorry, the special favor I had done by admitting Dan at this stage in our discussion has been sabotaged.
Sorry, I can't.
So
Sorry.
I
Close the meeting. Thanks, Chair.
Is that you, Dan?
Yes.
Okay,
Do you hear me?
Thank you. 2 minutes.
Yeah.
I hear you now. Thank you.
You know, sorry for coming late, but really the subject of discussion today is so important. The involvement of our youth. What happened? Surely the issue here, if you have this level of unemployment, this level of migration, all of us, if we go to our rural homes, are you not aware that you actually don't find the under 40s and under 30s anymore? And they are gone. But definitely the youth of Zimbabwe, even if they are out there, they still envy to come back home. And as soon as when the situation changes, definitely there will be youth involvement as ourselves who are aging. Definitely, we're there a long time, over 80s and so on. But definitely the struggle goes on and the youth will actually join this struggle. There's no doubt about it. Of the economic emancipation, in terms of political governance, in terms of everything that goes on. Zimbabwe today is really nothing. I've been doing a study and discovering that Zimbabwe exports, in COMESA, actually they don't export anything besides tobacco and something. They don't export anything even to our neighboring countries. Then it shows very well that we've come down immensely compared to countries that were ahead of them. Thank you very much, the speakers, because this is a very important topic that will go on and on until things are resolved. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Very useful reference there to the youths are yearning to come back when the situation changes. The situation will not change by itself. I hope our youth will take due heed of that and be part of the change. Terence, I see you have your hand up. You're really itching to share a last reflection about the way forward. Thank
yes,
you.
Doc. Yes, Doc. Thanks for giving me the opportunity. And I know it's getting late, but after repeatedly listening to, that reference about where are the youth and so forth, and having just come out of that cohort recently myself, I do, understand where the youth are today, in terms of their preference to vote with their feet rather than do the actual voting in the country. And as a result, they are migrating. And I did note, the reference to the pre-independence authoritarianism that was there, which was, of course, distinct in its nature by, of course, the color and the imperial aspects to it. But if you look at the current authoritarian system that the youth confront today, it's almost similar in nature, to the one that was there before independence. But of course, when you remove the racial aspect to it, you then find that we confront a different monster. If you then take on board, the question of it being a monster that actually is also or has the support, of fellow African brothers or African countries, confronting it becomes a very different proposition. Where in the past you would then have, almost the whole international community unambiguous, in calling out a particular regime for its shortcomings, and then giving that support to whoever was prepared to confront that system locally. We do not have that current support as young people in Zimbabwe currently. So if you look, for example, that's recently the elections we had in Zimbabwe, roundly condemned by everyone, both your local African observer missions and the international observer missions. But if you then look at the kind of support that this regime then gets, from those countries, those who are supposed to be our African brothers that matter, particularly within the SADC region, we then find that we really face a different animal altogether to the one that we faced, prior to independence. So if you then also throw in the mix of a regime that is really prepared to go all out, to defend its power through killing, through, shutting out people like Prof. Mugano was rightly saying, and, really ring fencing all avenues of livelihoods around preservation of its own power, you then find that the proposition or the system that we are confronting today is rather different. And as a result is why you see, the youth preferring to say, okay, we might live to fight another day. But for now, of course, what I see a lot of my fellow young people doing is to wait for that internal implosion to come. Of course, I don't agree with Prof. Mugano that the implosion will necessarily be an economic implosion. I see more a political implosion from within that might come, the same way we saw the implosion that resulted in the removal of former President Mugabe. This is what the youth today are waiting for. And probably just to conclude and tying up to say the issue of the national question I raised earlier, I think we need to have another discussion where we really go in depth, to discuss what constitutes this particular national question I'm talking about. I will propose, coming from the school of thought where I come from, that we need to interrogate three facets of this particular national question. The first one being how national wealth is created and shared. The second being, completing that nation-state formation project, which for me in 1980 was not concluded and remains unconcluded up to now. And of course, the third aspect being tying this nation-state formation question with the issue of democratization, which I think then allows for all the groups that are in Zimbabwe to actively participate in the building of a nation-state. I will stop there, Doc. Thank you.
Thank you, Terence. I will not attempt to summarize our discussion. It's been very rich, it's been wide-ranging, It's also been very provocative, leaves more questions unanswered. I want to ask Tony Rila to thank us. Tony.
Thank you, Simba. Thank you, Simba, for doing your excellent, masterly moderation as always, and keeping the time balance and also allowing flexibility. Thank you to Gift. Thank you to Tendai. I'm sorry Janet really couldn't join us. It would have been interesting to hear from the left on how they understand the Mutapa project. I think it's been a very, very interesting discussion. So on behalf of Ibo, who unfortunately couldn't join us, he's committed to something else at this particular time, I want to thank you all. I want to point out that the next dialogue on the 9th of November will deal with a very immediate problem, and that is what will SADC do with the Zimbabwean election? This is a very, very pressing question. This is the first time that SADC has ever issued a condemnatory, even if it's weak in many respects, report on the Zimbabwean election. The SADC summit will meet tomorrow, as we understand it, and we'll wait to see what they have to say. All of you have been watching to see how SADC, how our neighbors and colleagues in long struggles will react to this election. And then we will digest this on the 9th of November. So on behalf of SAPIS Trust, thank you, Simba, thank you, Gift, thank you, Tendai, thank you to everybody who participated, and good night.
Thank you all for enduring my dictatorship, and good night to us all.